Welcome into Husker Max today, March 20th, 2025. I'm Kaleb Henry. That is Nick Handley on location in a place with much better weather than what we are experiencing back home in Nebraska, where we got multiple inches of snow and blizzard, and now the sun is going to create a muddy mess here, but not in oh so beautiful California, where baseball picked up a midweek sweep, and it is March Madness officially here. The men are through the first four. Women finish out their first four today, and then they get going with first round action tomorrow, including Husker women's hoops against Louisville. We will look at both brackets, get a lot of picks, get a lot of breakdown. I've got questions about Nebraska men's basketball recruiting based on a lot of Nebraska high school hoopers in this NCAA tournament, none of them rostered in Lincoln. But Nick, I've got to start and I've got to ask, it's a midweek sweep after getting swept on the weekend, and the hidden ball trick came out. The hidden ball trick. You'll love to see it. How did the things go for you as you were able to watch this team in Malibu?
It was great. This was the get right moment that this team, I think, desperately needed, and for more emphasis on the offensive side of it too. So many things happened with this team in 2 days that I think you look at the weekend before against UCLA and thought, okay, strikeout numbers were abysmal going into this series against Pepperdine. Runners in scoring position was really bad. I mean, at one point that UCLA game, Nebraska was 0 for 14 with that situation. So it wasn't a matter of getting guys on base. It was being able to drive them in. That all changed against Pepperdine. And this is, Ben and I talked about this in the broadcast. This wasn't an apples to apples conversation when it came to comparing Nebraska, the struggles against UCLA and the success they had against Pepperdine, because Pepperdine is not nearly as good of a team as UCLA. Pepperdine is struggling on their own. But there were things about Pepperdine that we did walk away from that series somewhat impressed. I mean, for a team that has a really bad collective batting average, I mean, they were scrapping at bats. They were putting some pressure. They were getting some swings on some good pitches. So, it wasn't all like all of a sudden Nebraska played just the most inept team in the world. But the bottom line is you had an opportunity against a team that was going to throw a bunch of different arms, that also was struggling on the mound a little bit. Could Nebraska finally take advantage of that? And you think about this one too, Kaleb, the success that Nebraska had offensively, they did so without key bats in their lineup, guys that they're sitting right now. And, a guy like Gabe Swanson, we didn't see a lot of Case Sanderson either, so those are two guys that you would hope that at some point are going to be back in this lineup and are going to be able to contribute. But great to see Dylan Carey with the multi-home run game yesterday. He was the only guy who didn't have a hit in Tuesday's game, but he had some hard hit balls. And then yesterday he's able to be like, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do today. Tyler Stone is swinging a hot bat right now too. Watching guys like Devin Nunez as a freshman continuing to do some good things. That 7 through 9 on Tuesday was a collective 6 of 9 at the plate. And then 7 through 9 collectively in this series had 10 hits. So that you saw production all throughout the lineup, but it also came down to situational hitting too. When Nebraska got runners on, they had two perfectly executed hit and runs where you get from first to third, and they were able to attack the vacated hole in the 6 hole over by the shortstop when he had to cover the bag with the runner taking off. So twice that happened. Nebraska, this is kind of a crazy stat. Going into the Pepperdine series, they did not have a sacrifice bunt. They had a couple of bunts for hits, but they did not have a sacrifice bunt. They were able to get 1 and 2 of the season in this series too. So it was the situational hitting more than anything for Nebraska. And it came from so many different players that there is no question. And they got a big challenge starting tomorrow night against USC. USC is no joke, but you needed to take care of business. You needed to get right, both physically and mentally in the batter's box. And I think Nebraska definitely was able to use this 2-game series against Pepperdine to do exactly that. Not a great Pepperdine team, but a team that, hey, that's who was on your schedule, and Nebraska took care of that, especially offensively.
How many times over the first month plus of this season had we seen a situation, which happened yesterday, and Nebraska didn't take advantage of it, but yesterday they did. Riley Silva stretching a sliding double You get an overthrow, turns it into he's now on third, and there's no outs.
Mm-hmm.
And there are plenty of other times, not that exact situation, but other times you're in similar situations and he doesn't score.
Right.
And that's, yes, it's Pepperdine, but that's who's on your schedule. But yesterday, you got that guy home. And you, as you were saying, the timely hitting finally showed up both the last couple of days. I saw this stat yesterday, and I can't remember who shared it. But is this right that Nebraska had no strikeouts yesterday for the first time since a game in 2014?
No, they did not. And they only had 2 the day before. So think about that. The strikeout numbers that were so high. And I know that this was something that this entire coaching staff was really working hard on trying to address, trying to get through to the hitters, look at that approach and everything that they're seeing and be able to communicate back and forth that way. That was, I know, a heavy emphasis going into this Pepperdine series. And you get 2 in 2 games compared to at one point, I don't know what the final number was against UCLA, but in the 3 games, it was 31, I think.
Yeah, it was over 30, yeah.
Yeah, so to not strike out once and to do so the only 2 times was the first inning of Tuesday's game. They had 2 Ks. And after that, so you essentially you go 16 innings without a strikeout. I mean, so you're going to take that without question. And it was that you mentioned the play there of why am I just completely blanking on the player you just brought up on the double?
Riley Silva.
Oh yeah, Silva. Thank you. The Silva one, that one was hilarious because the ball gets away from the first baseman. You had to try to pick it, and so it gets into shallow right field, and so Riley Silva just does not hesitate, and so he's rounding first, and all of a sudden they probably have him dead in the water at second, but then they overthrow that. I mean, he pops right back up, and then he's motoring into third base. So that's how you lead off an inning. And then it's Hogan Haligzo who hits the ball on the screws, but right to the shortstop. And so the run doesn't score. But then Joshua Overby comes back up, hits a little bit more of a soft ground ball over to the right side. That does score it. But then Hogan Haligzo able to drive in a couple of runs as well. So, I mean, it was almost like the game found everybody that was putting in the work in the batter's box. Dylan Carey, who hit some hard balls on Tuesday, he was rewarded on Wednesday with 2 home runs. So I can't feel better for this team of what they were struggling with it offensively, where they were able to almost kind of vent at the plate, if you will, kind of let out their frustrations against Pepperdine pitching. And here's the other thing. It was one thing to get out on top early in the game, but so many times we've seen Nebraska maybe go through innings 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and there's no offense at all. They were relentless. They were putting up multiple crooked numbers, but then every time Pepperdine had an answer, Nebraska came right back and took it back. And so they were just absolutely killing the will of that team with what they were able to do offensively. They were bullying Pepperdine offensively, which we can't say we've seen a whole heck of a lot with this team.
Scored in 7 of the 9 innings yesterday. It was incredibly impressive, the number of times that, we just talked about UCLA on Sunday, where got to, after scoring in the 3rd inning, only got 1 player to second base the rest of the game. Against Pepperdine yesterday, scored in 7 of the 9 innings, including a couple of crooked numbers on there. A little bit Johnny Holstaff yesterday. Tuesday, though, Carson Yasa continues to look really good. What did you see from this pitching staff, especially Yasa, in playing a really key midweek role for this program?
Yeah, he's really coming to form, and I think this is exactly what Rob Childers expected from him, is being able to display that big league fastball. And he hit 97 a couple of times on Tuesday, but his breaking ball, and he's coming with a slide piece right now that has been now with Wichita State and then Pepperdine has really been his money pitch. And he's locating that. He's able to get that in plus counts. He's able to I mean, there was probably several times I didn't even count. I probably should have, how many times he led off each batter with the slider and not the fastball. The fastball almost became the complementary pitch for him. So I think, and that's the adjustment that you make from being a dominant high school pitcher where you can throw 90 plus at somebody. And by doing so, even if it's not in the zone, you're going to intimidate them so much that you're going to get them to swing violently just because they're almost protection swings. In college, that's you got to be able to really prove your worth when it comes to what you have for an arsenal of pitching. And I think his ability to locate that breaking ball the way he has and is never looked better in these last two games. In doing so, that fastball comes in so much heavier. I mean, 95 plus is a heavy fastball no matter what. But when you're able to locate the breaking ball the way he has, that 97-mile-an-hour fastball must feel like an absolute earth-shattering pitch coming into those hitters. And I don't care what the skill level of those hitters are. So that was good. And then I want to give compliment to TJ Coates, who didn't have the start that he wanted to against Wichita State a week ago, but was able to go further into the start yesterday. And a similar recipe as we saw Carson Yassa. TJ Coates was hitting 94 miles an hour. I believe at one point he did hit 95. And he was also throwing a real good off-speed, good assortment of a changeup and the breaking ball that he was able to locate early on as well. And that allowed him to stay in that game early. He was getting in some plus counts. And even when he would get behind, he was starting to battle back. So I think there were some very positive steps taken by TJ Coates. And Kaleb, you remember how bad the midweek portion of Nebraska on what otherwise was a fantastic season. That midweek is what kept Nebraska from hosting a regional. They have flipped that obviously right now. I mean, they're midweek wise, they're unbeaten. So that's off to a good start, but it really does start on the mound. The only guy that probably had an off day, if you will, out of the bullpen for Nebraska that has been lights out to this point that I think has just been fantastic is Price Bender. Price Bender is a freshman. He's a strike thrower. He's got that sidearm delivery. He's got that deceptive release and balance point. So he's always given hitters other things to think about other than the type of pitch that's going to be coming across the plate. He was getting behind hitters a little bit more. He was a little more hittable than he's been in previous outings, but he's also one of those guys that I think even as a freshman, he's built up so much equity that you just chalk that up as a one-off or just a tough day that he'll be able to rebound. And Clevenger wasn't as sharp as he has been as well. Other than that, everybody who I think handled the baseball in the two games on the mound for Nebraska gave you a lot more positives than negatives. So it was good work out of the bullpen. We saw, Luke Broderick having to come in at one point too and nail it down, and he did so. So everybody got the work that I think they needed to, but I think for the most part, collectively, that effort was pretty solid on the mound, even though there was maybe a little bit more runs, especially that Tuesday night game than we had anticipated.
I'm going to preface this with saying none of this is easy. I'll just say that to begin with. Hitting a baseball, not easy.
Yeah.
But if you are sitting fastball and a breaking ball comes in, it is a little bit easier to adjust. There's a timing aspect to it. If you're sitting off speed, if you're sitting slider, because that slider's hitting the zone, and then 97 comes in, you can't quicken up your hands enough for that. And I like that adjustment for Yassa. That was always fun. Again, different level to start out for me, curveballs, and then the fastball be that FU pitch, because now you're behind. And he's throwing about 10 miles an hour faster than I ever did. and to do that to guys, that's really good to see out of a young guy, and obviously getting really good coaching. But there's going to be times where you want to get ahead with the fastball, times you want to get ahead with that slider. But if he can be really good with that off-speed pitch, that bodes well for the future of getting him to the weekend.
Absolutely. And I think there's going to be a time that we're going to have this conversation of what type of pro potential I shouldn't even say potential because that's already there. Yeah. But what is he able to do to put himself in the conversation of the top 3 rounds going forward? Now, he's still got a lot of baseball to play, still got some growth. But, going back to just what you talked about with the fastball, think about 6'7", 97 miles an hour as opposed to 6 foot 97 miles an hour. The distance that he's cutting off by the time he's releasing that ball, you have even that much less time to react to his fastball. And then, he's hammering you with a backdoor slider. Or all of a sudden you're seeing a spinner that's coming at your shoulder and you're thinking, okay, am I getting fastball spin here? Am I getting slider spin? Is this thing going to hit me? And then all of a sudden it drops right there in the zone. So what I'm getting at is, and again, I don't want to make it sound like, okay, Wichita State was this amazing offensive team and Pepperdine was this amazing offensive team. But when you see the tools that Carson Yassa has always had, and now refining that and developing that, like Rob Childers is with this young man, you see what could be with him. You see how effective he could be. You see a guy that could definitely be a weekend type guy, could definitely be a Friday type guy if he continues to head down the road he is right now. He's had 2 great starts, and then at some point, he's probably going to be called into action in the weekend out of the bullpen. How does he respond to that as well? Is this something that they would only do in an emergency situation because you want to keep them with that starting pitching routine, because those routines are so big for these guys? But there's a lot of value in that right arm for Carson Yasa. And I think that's one of those guys that people and even I think scouts in the area are starting to take notice of. You look at the body, you look at the frame, the length, big time fastball, but now is displaying a pretty explosive breaking ball. Okay, keep your eye on him, because if he keeps developing the way he is this time next year, we might be having some really big conversations about Carson Yasa.
All right, 1-5 in the Big Ten Conference, back into league play this weekend. The road trip continues on that West Coast in LA. USC this weekend. What does that matchup look like for Nebraska? As hopefully this was a get right series in the midweek, and then can get some positivity going back into the league.
Well, this has been kind of I don't want to say the challenge or the alarming development or whatever you want to say, but we remember it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about both what is going on with USC, what is going on with UCLA. Well, we saw UCLA with our own eyes, and this is not just because they beat Nebraska, so we got to talk good about them to make Nebraska feel better. No, I think anybody who has watched UCLA play this year is going to tell you this is a good baseball team. And when we got back on Tuesday night, we just so happened to be home in time to watch USC taking on Arizona State in a midweek game, and USC looks all the part too. I mean, they're 12-8 right now, 2-4 in conference play, so maybe not the same eye-popping numbers as UCLA, but when you look at their lineup, and that was the one thing just watching that game against Arizona State this week, is they've got guys that look the part. They got guys that can swing it. As soon as we sat down, I can't remember which hitter they had, but he was down in their lineup. I think he was their 7 or 8 hole hitter, just hit a massive bomb against Arizona State, who, as we always know, is a quality team as well. So, this is a team that, they got swept by Oregon. Oregon's one of the best teams in the Big Ten. I think Oregon and UCLA are going to be right there at the end. I think a lot of us maybe slept a little bit too much on UCLA, but it's a USC team. They pitch it, I think, a little bit better than UCLA does, but their offense not quite as good. So that is what I think is going to be really interesting, of the type of confidence Nebraska draws from these last 2 games against Pepperdine, against what I think is going to be a little bit better, more established staff at USC compared to UCLA. But also, how does that help guys like Will Walsh? How does that help guys like Ty Horn and Jackson Brockett against maybe not nearly as loaded 1 through 9 of an offense as what they saw the prior weekend in Westwood? So that to me is going to be the big challenge for Nebraska. But yeah, this is definitely it's a USC team that is good, but I think it is also a great opportunity for Nebraska to, on a trip that ended so ominously, could end with a lot of success, and that could really springboard Nebraska into that conference play and that success that they need as they now play some more games at home when they get back.
Friday on FS1, Saturday, Sunday on Big Ten Plus, every one of those on the Huskers Radio Network, with, of course, Nick and Ben and the whole gang over there with the Huskers Radio Network. It sounded exciting when the hidden ball trick came out. I have to hammer that out, because that was so fun to see, and everyone play their part,
It fooled a lot of us. I didn't even realize what had happened. And Ben was right on it as well. He noticed it, but so we saw Stoney in the hotel lobby afterwards, and we wanted to know if this was something that was signaled from the dugout. Now, the base runner who ended up getting lifted, their coach was Tyler Latour, was not thrilled about what happened to his base runner, so he ended up benching him after that. But Cardinale, he kept, before, as Tyler Stone would release the ball back to TJ Coates, Cardinale would immediately start to get his lead, and Coates went over there probably 5 or 6 times, and it was almost like Cardinale took it as a challenge of, okay, every time he comes over, I'm gonna get off even further, and I'm gonna do it quicker. Yeah. So this is the veteran presence of Tyler Stone realizing this was all him, and TJ Coates just sold it. He was off the rubber off the mound enough that what you're supposed to be to pull that off.
Yep.
And Tyler Stone just thought, hey, you know what? I'm just going to bluff a throw. So it wasn't even like Tyler Stone threw it. TJ Coates walked around the mound a little bit and they really tried to sell it. It was just a quick, he threw it and then TJ Coates acts like he catches it. And then Cardinale thinks, all right, cool. Now I'm going to get my lead. And then, I mean, within a second, he tags him out. And it was, you could see Cardinale was absolutely pissed, just pissed. It was one of those things of, I was trying to be overly aggressive. They caught me in it. They used my aggressiveness to their advantage. And that's exactly what Tyler Stone did. He's like, well, I know if I fake this throw, if he has no idea, he's going to jump right off. So it won't even take that long. I mean, no one will even know what's going on. And that was, that was fantastic. And Caleb, that's usually what you see in West Coast baseball, whether we're talking about the old Pac-12 or the West Coast Conference, they usually pull stuff off like that. That's the antics that they usually have, some built-in plays that they can kind of fool you, play a little trickery. And it was Nebraska who took a page out of that to get out of the inning, which was it was quite entertaining.
Yeah, for Husker fans of the College World Series, that's what Long Beach State brings to Omaha.
Yep.
Typically.
Exactly.
All right, so March Madness is here. Real quick before we dive into a lot of basketball, because I don't want to forget this by the end of the show. Wrestling begins NCAA championships today as well. Wells Fargo Center out in Philadelphia. 9 of the 10 wrestlers for the Huskers are at the NCAA championships. They had a 9th place finish last year. Really good chance to improve on that with another top 10 finish, potentially top 5 finish. That first round gets going 11 a.m. this morning. Second round this evening. That second round will be on ESPN, and then things bounce around between ESPNU and ESPN National, ESPN2. You can find all of that at huskermax.com. Jeff Ekstrom, one of our contributors, put together a really good breakdown on how to follow along for all of that. So Husker wrestling, after getting second at the Big Tens just a couple of weeks ago and scoring a lot of points, beating Iowa, as we made sure to just behind Penn State, but they've got their national championships, NCAA championships, beginning later this morning. All right, basketball though, Nick, and this has been, now that we're through the first 4 on the men's side, we'll start on the men. North Carolina looked really, really good for a team that shouldn't have been there. And last night's game, Xavier, what a comeback over Texas. I thought Texas had them dead to rights at halftime, but it was all Xavier through there. These first 4 games have been exceptionally exciting.
Except for the North Carolina game.
Yeah, except for North Carolina got up and we're all just disappointed in San Diego State. But you had the first game come down to that buzz, the Hail Mary tip around and the ball goes in. You had the 16 seed game yesterday where unfortunate injury for the young man for American, but the game was still really entertaining up and down to the wire. And then the Xavier comeback at the end. The first 4, I think, has really set the tone for what we're going to get going today.
I don't know where you are on this. The college basketball game has been interesting to where, and maybe I say this every year, I feel like it's a revelation each year when I come to this conclusion of, doesn't it feel like there's separation between the contenders to the teams that are just making it in? And I feel like when you look at your 1s and your 2s and your 3s, that, boy, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of parity. And then you start to look at the bracket, and then you start talking yourself into, wait a minute, are we now seeing the impact of NIL and even to some extent of COVID and having that extra year where rosters were able to stay really old? And so some of 5 or 6 seed teams that maybe they had to endure an injury here and there could have had a better season, but they're healthy now. And so now all of a sudden you can talk yourself into some deeper runs for those teams. And when I look at my bracket, I thought, I'm going to have a lot of chalk in this thing. But then as I'm going through, I'm like, and it's not, and I'm not doing it because it's, you feel like you have to, you got to get that cliched 12, whatever, one of the 4 12s over 5, you got to pick at least one of them. You got to find an upset here and there because it's inevitable. There's going to be one. I have a couple of double-digit seeds getting wins, But what I also came down to is when I get into the Elite Eight, when I get into the Final Four, it's a lot of high seeds,
Yeah.
but it's trying to decipher amongst that group who I think truly is going to be the last team standing. And I'll jump right to who I have winning it, and I think it's a popular pick, but there's a reason why. I have Florida winning it, but I think they're as well-rounded as any team, but my confidence level on picking them compared to teams in the past isn't great because I do think that there is so much talent that has been doled out, especially across the board with the ones, the twos, and threes, that this thing I think it plays very interesting. And we all wake up the same way on these mornings, and we want to dig into the upsets. Even if it's a 1 seed that we had winning the national championship and they lose to a 16, we're still going to celebrate it because it's rare. And you have a chance to see that. And you have a chance to witness the unthinkable. You celebrate that. But I'm trying to figure out where the most damage is going to be in one of these brackets. And you and I talked about this on Monday. The South region looks like where just about anybody could come out of it. I mean, that if Auburn wins and the winner of Louisville and Creighton going to have, I think, a more than a puncher's chance of taking down Auburn right out of the gate in the second round. So there's some teams, and I think there's some high seeds that have to withstand that pretty early before the second weekend. But who is going to be the best of the best right now? That to me was probably the toughest thing, the toughest conclusion to come to.
All right. Well, let's look through the bracket a little bit, and let's start out with, as you talk about some higher seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Who are any of those? Obviously, the 12 over 5 has become popular.
Right.
Oh, goodness me. Now that like you fill out the bracket, now
Sure.
You look through it and go, what did I do?
Right.
I picked all 12s.
Oh, you did? Wow. Okay.
And I think in part of that being, I think the 5s are really weak this year. Clemson in particular, but
I
Memphis
definitely have McNeese. Yep, I took McNeese as well, for sure.
So yeah, you've got some of that, and then you look at some of the other places. Is Kansas checked out against Arkansas? That's a 10-7, so it's not as egregious. But like Drake, Missouri, that's a popular one that people are looking at.
Yep.
You've also got North Carolina coming through the play-in games as an 11 seed. And there's always someone that comes out of those play-in games. UC San Diego as a 12 has been popular, taking on Michigan. So you've also got like VCU and BYU. I know High Point has been a popular pick that people are looking at. There are some double-digit seeds of intrigue this year.
Yeah, the highest seed that I have advancing into the second round is Grand Canyon. I did take them over Maryland. And that's I just out of dumb luck, I had a chance to watch 2 games of Grand Canyon, one right around early January, and then just recently. That's an athletic team. And I know Maryland with their bigs, that's going to be imposing, but I think there's a speed advantage for Grand Canyon. And if they're able to get up and down, they could really try to gas Maryland. So I'm trying to justify at least something deeper than a 12 over 5. And so that was the only one I could come to. So yeah, I don't have any 14s or 15s going forward. My lowest seed is Grand Canyon moving on. I do have, you mentioned Drake, Missouri. I do have Drake moving on over Missouri. I liked what I saw from Xavier. I know it's been a weird season for them, but I went ahead and rolled with Xavier over Illinois. So I got 2 Big Ten teams right out of the gate getting upset. As far as anything crazier than that, I did go with a 12 over 5. That was the McNeese over Clemson matchup. And just some small ones. I don't even call it an upset, but Georgia at 9 beating 8 seed Gonzaga. I was tempted to go Vandy over St. Mary's, but I actually like St. Mary's a little bit. So I think St. Mary's could be kind of pesky. So I did stick with them. I got Baylor over Mississippi State again. So again, nothing crazy. I know my heart tells me, oh, you should do this. And my brain's saying, no way. I gave a little bit more look at St. John's in Omaha because of the story with Omaha, but you know how it can be your first time in the NCAA tournament. You're so excited to have accomplished that. Everybody is patting you on the back, all of those distractions. when it comes to game time tonight with the Mavericks and the Johnnies, man, it's just not a good matchup for Omaha. It is just not a good matchup. I really wanted to go there, but I just couldn't do it. So yeah, but the lowest seed I do have going though, I am taking GCU to take down Maryland.
I'll be happy for Omaha if they get it done. It's just not something that I'm putting my money behind.
Right.
And we'll get down to that West region. Let's start with the South, and let's begin with the Big Ten teams that are in this region. You've got a 2-seed Michigan State taking on Bryant and a 5-seed Michigan taking on UC San Diego. I got Michigan State winning their game, and as a matter of fact, making it to the Elite Eight. I have Michigan losing round 1. Where are you at on those two?
Ooh, okay. So I am not exactly the opposite. I have Michigan State obviously moving on to take on Marquette in the second round.
Okay.
I am riding Michigan all of a sudden. Yeah, so I got Michigan not only beating UC San Diego, but I got Michigan taking down the Fighting Trev Alberts of Texas A&M to move into a big matchup against Auburn, where I have Michigan upsetting Auburn.
Okay.
And then we're not done yet, Caleb. I got Michigan in the Final Four.
Okay.
I got Michigan in the Final Four. I got Michigan State. Michigan State. Where do I have them? Now I gotta look at. Okay, I got Michigan State losing to Iowa State.
Wow.
Yes.
All right.
So
okay.
I took the other Michigan team.
Yeah, surprising right out the gate. First game of the day, because there's a little bit of local intrigue. Louisville and Creighton, 11:15. So we're less than 2 hours away from this thing started. What a terrible draw for Creighton. Louisville should have been seated probably 3 or 4 lines higher, but they do get to play essentially a home game, and then the reward is potentially against Auburn in the second round. But you can say, oh, I'm going with the Birds, but I'm picking it's Cardinals over Blue Jays in that first one for me.
I went back and forth on this one so much. And when Creighton has, and there's one player right now that I think could potentially, I should say 2, that could potentially be difference makers for this one for Creighton. And that's the way Jemai Neal's been playing lately, but also Jason Green has been very solid, and that athleticism that he continues to bring and just the energy, he'll give you some offense too, but just some quality minutes that he's bringing. We know Kalkbrenner and what he can do, and Stephen Ashworth, that 1-2 punch right there. I am curious what this Creighton team would look like if Pop Isaacs was healthy and playing. I think Creighton, first of all, wouldn't be on the 9 line. I think they would be a higher seed. But I'm with you. I think Louisville was just maybe one of the worst draws, given the way that Louisville is playing right now too. I took Louisville as well. I just think that is going to be I think it's going to be one of the more entertaining games. I wish this was also a night game and not right out of the gate. But yeah, I'm going to go with Louisville in that one as well.
My Elite Eight out of this region is Auburn, Michigan State, with Auburn winning that one. Moving down to the West, where you've got Florida as your 1 seed, St. John's as the 2, obviously in that Omaha game. We talked a little bit about the Johnnies and the Mavericks there. For Big Ten teams, you have got Maryland against Grand Canyon in this region, and you said you like GCU here.
Yep, I'm taking GCU to win that one. I think they outlast and outgas Maryland in this one. So GCU, the Lopes, will roll on.
Which is, I like the way you and I have gone on these brackets so far. I have Maryland to the Sweet 16. I have Maryland to the Sweet 16, where they fall to Florida. Florida, Texas Tech is my Elite Eight game out of this region, with the Red Raiders going to the Final Four.
Okay. And you know what? That is not a crazy pick. I've seen a lot of love for Texas Tech. And I've seen some of the talking heads that this is their life that would have Texas Tech in it if they played anybody else but Florida on that side of it. So obviously, and I told you I have Florida winning the national championship, but I also have Florida playing Texas Tech in the exact same game. I just have Florida moving on.
Yeah.
I like everything there is to see about Texas Tech. I don't know if I love that matchup if we do get to Florida versus Texas Tech, but yeah, I think if you put Texas Tech in any other region, I think they have a really good shot of making the Final Four just based on what they have shown to do all season long.
All right, back up to the top right, the East region. Duke is the top seed there. Alabama, the 2 seed. Couple of Big Ten teams. Oregon is a 5 seed taking on Liberty. Wisconsin, a 3 against Montana. Like I said, I inadvertently went with all of the 12, so I've got Oregon losing to Liberty round 1. Wisconsin, though, I have got making the Sweet 16 where they fall to Alabama.
Okay, so I am with you on Liberty over Oregon. I got Liberty losing to Arizona in the next round, but the Wisconsin one, I also have them taking on BYU. I got BYU beating VCU, and then it is BYU in my really one of my upsets taking down Wisconsin in the round of 32. So I have BYU moving on.
My Elite 8 here is Duke, Alabama, and I put the Crimson Tide to make the Final Four.
I went with Duke, and this to me comes down to the injury situation right now between the two teams. And I think that with what we've seen from Flag and just his overall, the importance, we're talking about one of the best players that we've seen in a very long time, and it's effortless for him. I'm a little concerned with Grant Nelson. And Grant Nelson for Alabama, if he is not 100% and it is not effective, how does that look for Alabama in the longevity of this tournament? I think Alabama is more than capable of working around that, even with not 100% Grant Nelson. But that one does concern me. So now that Flag seems to be, I think, going to get only better and better and better, how is Nelson? And if you ask me a week from now, maybe I would change my pick, because I think that could definitely happen where Alabama would take them down. But right now I had the exact same matchup, but I am rolling with Duke in this one.
All right, there we go. Now down to the Midwest region. Houston, the top seed, taking on my SIUE Cougars in Wichita this afternoon. I would love to go with SIUE there, but I don't think that's realistically going to happen. Tennessee, the 2 seed in the region. For Big Ten teams, Purdue, a 4 taking on High Point. Illinois, a 6 against Xavier. UCLA, a 7 against Utah State. And as I look across all 3 of those games, I have the Big Ten going 0-3.
Oh, okay. I did get Purdue. So you took High Point as well?
I took High Point there.
Okay. I did take Purdue. And I did go ahead and advance UCLA. I got Illinois losing to a Xavier team that all of a sudden is house money, baby. And those can be some of the more dangerous teams, at least in the first round, when they get that dramatic win and that come-from-behind win that they had, to be able to ride that for at least one more game. So I am going to take Xavier to take down Illinois, but I do have UCLA moving on. I got UCLA, in fact, upsetting Tennessee.
Oh,
yes, I did take a Big Ten team to have a little bit of an upset there. So Michigan going to the Final Four is probably my big headliner. But yes, I do have UCLA end up losing to Kentucky, but I got them moving on into the Sweet 16. Purdue, I do also have moving up into the Elite 8 game to where they end up losing to Houston.
Yeah, and I've got Houston.
Sweet 16 game.
Sweet 16 there. I've got Houston over Tennessee in my Elite 8.
I've got Houston, Kentucky in my Elite 8, where it is Houston that moves on.
I've got Kentucky losing round 1.
Oh.
I told my wife, I was like, and I was helping my sister with the bracket as well, and they were asking like for advice on stuff, and I was like, guys, I feel like this year I'm way more aggressive on some of the upsets than I typically am. Whereas when I listen to some people, they're like, hey, this is a really good year for chalk. And I was like, yeah, but also I look at a lot of the lower seeds, and I feel like this year I'm able to talk myself into it more than I have in previous years.
Okay, do you do this where you feel like as you're going into the bracket, you have a plan and there are certain, maybe a region here and there that you can't wait to dig into, but then as you start to advance a winner, you look at it and you're thinking, well, this isn't all that crazy. Or, I know I wanted to do this, but now I don't think I can. I don't know. I have that problem where I go in thinking This is how I'm going to go about it. These are some of the games that I'm definitely going to pick. And then I look at it and think, wait a minute. What am I missing here? And so I classic overthinker, I think is my issue right here.
I try to look at the matchups and who's healthy.
Yeah.
And from there, because
who's playing well, who looked good in their conference tournament, who seems to be riding a heater.
Right. And so like, that's one of the reasons that it's like, okay, Iowa State's a 3, but I don't like them at all. Like there's those types of situations. Memphis, like there's all these different things. Where do the matchups look with some of these higher seed teams, the double-digit numbers, that they've got size, or they're really locked down defensively, or they're really efficient in this thing or that. And it goes, okay, well, this team turns the ball over a lot and gives up offensive rebounds. But this lower seed team turns their opponents over a lot and grabs a lot of offensive rebounds. It's like, whoa, okay. That's a matchup. You've got to go, I'm going to roll the dice with that one. And I feel like this year I rolled with a lot more of those potential matchup nightmares in the first round than I have in the past. That's why but still, even with all of that, I end up with a Final Four of Auburn, Texas Tech, Houston, Alabama.
Yeah, my Final Four it's not sexy because, again, it's a lot of chalk, but I've got Duke advancing, I've got Houston advancing, I got Michigan, and I got Florida. So Michigan is obviously the big what? Okay, out of all the Big Ten teams, you're going to roll with them. Yeah, I think athletically, and again, I think they can score in different ways. I like their ability as long as they can stay healthy. I like their ability to string some together here, and there's some interesting matchups if it plays out that way, that especially in that South, because there could be many, many upsets. Hell, Michigan could be part of those upsets too. I don't want to make it sound like they're immune to that, but I just feel like the South is going to create something very wonky compared to the rest of the regions. And so, yeah, everything else I have chalk other than Michigan. I got Florida and Michigan, and I got Duke and Houston, and then my national championship game is Florida taking down Duke.
And I've got Houston over Auburn in that championship game. The furthest I have any of the Big Ten teams going is that Michigan State into the Elite Eight. Maybe it's because I watch too much Big Ten basketball and I see all of the flaws.
Yes.
Where I'm not as confident in them. And obviously it's been I know Purdue just made the national championship game, but it's been a long time since a Big Ten team has cut down the nets. And neither of us are picking a Big Ten team to do that. But maybe I'm just too on the inside on Big Ten teams, and I see so many of the flaws that it makes it tough for me to pick them. I'm able to talk myself into whoever their opponent is a lot more.
I did that, and this actually blew up in my face in 2022. I saw a lot of Kansas. My wife and I even went to a game in Lawrence and watched them play Baylor, a game that they won, by the way. But I just remember seeing a lot of Kansas that year, and I thought they're good, but I just don't know if they are a national championship team. I think I had them ended up losing in either the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, and of course they go on and they win it over North Carolina. And so I think that is a thing. I think there's such thing as seeing a team so much that you're drawn to them for a reason because they're playing good basketball, but the more you watch them, you're going to see them on a bad night, and that can, without question, influence what you think about them. And we all see Big Ten basketball. There's a reason that I wasn't high on Illinois. It's not just because I think Xavier is riding the heater. I would have taken whoever won that game to take down Illinois. Well, first of all, you got to have a low seed to win. But I didn't love the way that they were playing. But again, they've had many stretches throughout the season. We're like, all right, they look pretty good. So yeah, sometimes you just got to get away from it a little bit, I guess. But what, Caleb, we know as much as some sixth grader in Louisiana that's also filling one out that hasn't watched 1 second of college basketball, and he's going to have just as good of a shot of winning this thing as you and I.
You're not wrong. That's the fun part in all of this. Also, fun is getting to see the number of kids, the local talent that are dispersed across the country. And on the men's side, you have 13 former Nebraska high school players playing for 11 teams in the NCAA tournament, including Omaha and Creighton, obviously, but you've also got players on Marquette, Louisville, Texas, Michigan State, Purdue, Wisconsin, Alabama, Grand Canyon, and UCLA. That is 13 spread out across the country playing in the NCAA tournament. And here's where there's a little bit of a downer for me, Nick. None of them in the Scarlet and Cream. There's obviously talent here. And I know, okay, Grand Canyon's not Nebraska. Okay, cool. And it's in Omaha, University of Omaha. That's not the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I get that. Different leagues. But there is talent here that can be cultivated, and none of them are in Lincoln.
Yeah. You remember this conversation now, just going to bring up one player as an example, but when South Dakota State had Mike Daum. And Daum was one of those guys that some of us even had a chance to see in high school when he was at Kimball. And he was good. This is where, and this is, I'm going to kind of turn this into a football segment as well, of that ability, that importance now to be able to identify the unfulfilled talent. And what I mean by that is when you're able to see that there is something there, and in your system within a year, you can make that player, that raw player who might be dominating at the C2 level or the D1 level, and say, boy, we get him into our system. We get some meat on him. We get some more athleticism on top of what he already has. He is going to be a player to be able to creatively identify that type of player, because everybody would tell you Mike Daum was not anywhere close to what he ended up being at South Dakota State. But if you have that eye for talent and you have a local guy right there, you're able to put that investment into him early, and hopefully you get the type of result, because at the end of Mike Daum's career at South Dakota State, there wasn't one of us that was saying, I don't think he could have played for Nebraska. He's just having that talent in the Summit League. No, because they would play some very heavy hitters in non-conference play, and Mike Daum would hold his own. When they made the NCAA tournament and they're playing very high seeds, Mike Daum was holding his own. But could he have done that as a freshman? No, not at Nebraska, not at Creighton. So my point, and the reason I bring up the football part of it, is this is where I think that Matt Rule prides himself on that aspect of being able to find maybe some of the less busy players, or the highest offers or the most offers for guys, but seeing something there and saying, hey, I like he has X, Y, and Z. We can develop that. This guy's going to be a player. And you know what? We're kind of alone in really putting a lot of at least Power 4 love towards him. So we should be able to give him that type of love. He'll show the loyalty. We'll get him. We'll develop him. By the time he's a sophomore, junior, we might have ourselves a player. You wish that you could have seen more of that. And this goes back to Tim Miles' era as well. You wish you could have seen more of that. And I know that this is, Fred's always looking and is always trying to do that, but it's being able to find those guys that are just underdeveloped, but within a year or two can put on that type of weight, and those guys can pop. And as you just rattled off, that number alone tells you there are more than enough to choose from, that you should be able to get at least a couple in the state of Nebraska, or more importantly in Lincoln.
I just want to see more of a combination of some of that long-term development in Lincoln with the transfer portal, because we know transfer portal is going to be big. You just had 7 guys walk on senior day a couple of weeks ago. None of them originated with their collegiate careers here in Lincoln. I'd like to see more of a mixture instead of it so heavily to the transfer portal, which opens up in, within a week. So you're going to get that transfer portal going, and you're going to have to see what is building for this next year. On the women's side, by the way, though, spread out across 3 teams. Iowa has got 1. Creighton has got 2. Nebraska has got the other 4.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at that, and your two big in-state teams are taking the majority of your women's basketball talent right now. Not that there's not other talent out there, but the majority, including a couple of Gatorade Players of the Year. And then Taylor McCabe going to Iowa. And we all knew that a few years ago, and what she was able to do as a sharpshooter out of Fremont. So on the women's side, clearly they've identified this is where your main talent pool is going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
But on the men's side, it feels like it is, especially at a time where this is kind of a golden age, a renaissance of what the talent is basketball-wise in the state, and it's not going to UNL. Some of it's going to Creighton or finding its way back to Creighton, a la Isaac Trout type of a deal. Or some of them are playing at Omaha. But it's not like that's half the rosters for any of them either.
Yeah, and here's something that I think is interesting in the commonality between Creighton and Nebraska when it comes to that exact point you're bringing up. Think about Amy Williams, where she comes from. Okay, played at Nebraska, but also was in mid-majors before she got the jump back to Lincoln. The way you have to recruit and have to do that, have to really take advantage of the talent that you have around you regionally, because it is really tough to be able to go out to places like Las Vegas or Florida to pull in elite type talent to your program. So you have to cover the roots more than anything. Jim Flannery, who was under Connie Ori for so long, Creighton was a mid-major for so long before they go to the Big East. Same with Jim Flannery. The way that you have to recruit, you have to start within and then work your way out, because if you're not covering that talent pool there, it becomes even more difficult to identify that talent beyond that 500-mile radius. For so many years, I remember seeing Jim Flannery teams that had girls from Iowa, girls from the state of Minnesota. That was the core on top of the local kids from Nebraska. And I think a very similar thing. There's probably maybe a skewed perspective of when Britt Prince was making her decision. I don't know if it's going to work out in Nebraska, those types of players. But we're using that on how the men's thing works out usually. You've got this elite talent in the state, an elite scorer in the state. She's got options. Well, we've seen this too many times on the men's side where, yeah, sure, Nebraska is offered, but they're going to go elsewhere. That when Britt Prince chose Nebraska, you're thinking, well, I didn't see that coming. Well, it's because you got to look at how the women's side of it's doing it. You got to look at how Amy Williams and her staff is doing it, and Jim Flannery and how their staff is doing it. They are extremely embedded into the local recruiting scene, and they present such a great relationship offer and that whole connection that they're able to really put on not only the player but their families, that it becomes almost difficult to the point that a player would feel guilty if they didn't choose Nebraska or Creighton there. That's where I think Fred, I would love to see him get to, where those players, they have such an appealing connection and offer that you're going to be able to show examples of how they're going to develop. You're going to show what it's going to be like being here and being a rock star. And then now with the rev share and all of that to add on top of that, but to have that type of connection that we don't always just assume if there's an elite player that has a Nebraska offer that they are going to look elsewhere, that they actually have a shot of getting that type of player. Just like, again, most recently, Amy Williams able to get a player like Britt Prince.
Yeah. How do you make it enticing for that prospective student athlete to want to go there in a different way than obviously they have of late, to where you can point to the facilities, you can point to the fan support, but you also have to have the success. And I know the last 3 years significantly better of the Fred Hoiberg era than the first 3 years. Yeah. And we'll see if anything can be a launching point in the Crown in Vegas in a couple of weeks. But for Amy Williams' squad on the women's basketball side, this is 3 out of 4 years in the NCAA tournament. You have shown something with recruits that there is. And you've got a really talented freshman, and you've got really good incoming class that there is something here built for the future. On the men's basketball side, there's all the cracks everywhere because it's so many guys that are transferred in. They're here for 1 or 2 years, and then they're gone, and you don't know what kind of a long-term foundation there is really with any of the roster. That's a tough situation to be sold on.
Agreed. Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like you're going back to square one for the most part every year instead of building something. And I get it. The transfer portal it's a resource, and it's something that can get you good a lot quicker than you could before. but it does sometimes, and you lean too much into it, it doesn't allow you to build like what you're just talking about, that continuity, that development to where you get those freshmen that come in by the time they're sophomores and juniors, you got yourself a very solid, experienced class, and they've been together. They know what to expect from one another. And so when you're going through some of those lulls like you do, maybe in a January or February moment, you feel pretty good about them coming out of the other end very well. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, you want to get that instant talent, that experience in college basketball, but there is something to be said about continuity and being together for a while and developing that incoming freshman class from the traditional standpoint. And I think sometimes just in different programs, that gets a little bit overlooked these days.
Real quick look to the women's bracket where Nebraska takes on Louisville, 5 o'clock tomorrow. I don't know. Like this is so tough because I haven't watched any of the Louisville women's basketball. It's a tough one to look at as I pull up some of the preview stuff. They've got the first team all ACC guard, but Jada Curry did miss their conference tournament due to an injury. Don't know if she will be back. They've got a good freshman guard in Roberts, good senior forward. Those are their top scorers. It sounds like they struggle defensively. So if Nebraska can get going from 3, it's a good opportunity to grab another first round win for this Husker squad. They won in the first round last year when they went out to the Pacific Northwest. Then probably getting the host team there, because on the women's side, your pods are hosted by whoever's that highest seed, probably taking on Haley Van Lith and TCU in Fort Worth in that second round. How do you evaluate this pod for the Huskers and their potential to win one or multiple games?
I think it's an interesting draw, and to maybe simplify it as easy as saying there's something about the way that we know Nebraska will be supported in Fort Worth. And if you can take a little bit of that home court advantage away from TCU, and obviously this is if Nebraska beats Louisville, they got to do that first.
Right.
And being the lower seed, there's a slight lean towards Louisville. Although I mentioned this on Monday, I saw a lot of the BPI and the win percentage matrices. Some of them, in fact, more than I saw for Louisville, actually favored Nebraska. But I think it is an interesting draw from the standpoint that, these games end up getting, I mean, both on the men's and women's side, they get so emotional, these games do. And there's so much drama that if you can kind of put the fear of God, so to speak, into one of the higher seeds, and you've got a decent crowd behind you, even though you're the host team, well, that can play some tricks on you. That's the big difference, in my opinion, when it comes to the women's pods and hosting on campus sites as opposed to just the neutral sites that we see on the men's side. When you start to feel like, hey, we should have the overwhelming majority support here, but then you notice it's not that much, and you got this other team that is just relentless, and you're trying to draw something from your home crowd energy, and it's not as maybe as noticeable as you would hope. That can play some head games with you. So I just like where the location is. I like where Nebraska's playing so close to where Nebraska fans not only can travel, but there's already a lot of Nebraska transplants that live in the state of Texas that I'm sure are going to want to spend their Friday evening rooting on Nebraska, and hopefully the weekend rooting on Nebraska. So, for me, and this is also in that Louisville matchup, this is a lot about Nebraska. We talked about this on Monday. If Amy Williams feels like now with the team, the bodies that she has, despite the Natalie Potts and the Wideners that obviously can't play, that you've got a healthy Britt Prince, which is obviously huge. Even Alexis Markowski, who is dealing with some back issues a little bit there towards the end. They all seem to be not only healthy, but 100%. And that's huge, because I look at between Markowski, between Britt Prince, what you're getting from Bertie Rimdahl as well, and starting to see some of that bench production too. This feels like a team that has finally figured out how to play with the team, the bodies that they have, but also not only just with their starters, but be able to utilize that bench the way that they want to do it. And more times than not, they're getting production from that bench. Big thing to watch out for is Markowski foul trouble. If she can stay out of foul trouble, I think she's going to be a major force, at least Friday, and hopefully enough to where they push a game against TCU. And at that point, you just go absolutely out of the gate, hair on fire, able to attack TCU. I think it could be very, very interesting from that standpoint.
And you've had 2 weeks, so hopefully the health is all there. I think Nebraska's got a good chance to get by that first one. If they were to get by TCU, get into the second weekend, you're most likely playing Notre Dame. Like you're starting to get into the really good programs nationally. The Final Four I've got on the women's side is Notre Dame is in there as one of them. Also South Carolina, UCLA, and USC. So a couple of Big Ten teams there. I've got UCLA over South Carolina to cut down the nets in Tampa on April 6th. It's the West Coast teams that join the Big Ten are really, really good.
Especially the teams out here in LA. My goodness. Yeah. I was hoping to see I wanted to at some point during this trip be able to just cross paths with Juju and just say, hey, your game. Pretty awesome. We all thought the Big Ten was taking a big hit when Caitlin Clark finally moved on. We're like, Juju's pretty good too. And so that part of it, that's interesting. So you got UCLA taking down USC, or at least going further than USC then, huh?
Well, yeah, them meeting up in the Final Four.
Okay. Wow, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
and it probably will happen. I mean, it looks like that the paths are creating themselves to where that will happen too. So
yeah, UCLA, the overall number 1, and I know South Carolina and Don Staley were upset about that. But Bruins over Gamecocks in the championship there. The women's tournament gets going tomorrow. Like we said, Nebraska women's basketball, Louisville, 5:00 in the afternoon. And we want to encourage everyone to listen to Matt Coatney on the Huskers Radio Network for all of that call. Him and Greesh, who have done over 800 games together, and now they're back on another NCAA tournament call. Nick, you and the gang will have USC all weekend for baseball. And like I said earlier in the show, Nebraska wrestling at the NCAA championships out in Philadelphia. That gets going this morning as well. So this is a busy time of year, Nick. I'm really excited for it. And of course it's March Madness. It's one of my favorite times of year. I get to go sit down and my wife, she kept asking, she goes, yeah, I thought it was Thursday that you're going to be. Thursday is when it starts. And I was locked into a last second shot on Tuesday. I was like, yeah, Thursday is when it gets going. She goes, what are you doing now? I go, well, I'm kind of pre-gaming Thursday right now with the first four.
And it worked out so good for all of us because we get the day off here. So I'm sure a lot of the players are going to be watching a lot of basketball today. I know they're working out here in about an hour, but when they get back, basketball will be starting here on the Pacific Coast time, which is fantastic. So we're going to have a full day of it. And what's also kind of nice is for a game day tomorrow, here it wraps up pretty early because you get such an early start with the hoops, but it's always so much fun. And I do want to mention this. We started peeking ahead to the weather when we found out what the state of Nebraska was getting yesterday. We're like, okay, what are we coming back to Sunday night? Well, don't forget that huge series against Oregon State coming to Lincoln, that rare 3-game series where Oregon State top 5 baseball program coming to Lincoln, already seeing temps in the 70s, possibly 80s in Lincoln at Haymarket Park. Let's go. Heck yeah, we're bringing it with us.
Please bring all of it back with you if you can. Hey, Nick, then enjoy the weekend out there in LA. Safe travels back. We'll see where all of the travel schedule is, but Monday, 9 a.m., expecting to be back here on the Husker Max YouTube channel for Husker Max Today. For Nick Handley, I'm Kaleb Henry. Big weekend coming up. Go Big Red.